Fletcher, and we are here to talk all things college basketball. Once again, we've had a big week of results. We got a big week of games coming up over the next few days. We're getting closer and closer to March Madness, closer and closer to Selection Sunday. So we have plenty to discuss. Here in the first segment, we're going to talk about some coaching decisions made around the country. We've got LSU giving Matt McMahon a vote of confidence. We'll talk about what that means, kind of the math that goes into that decision at LSU to invest some NIL dollars into that program before they make a decision on the head coach. Then we'll talk about the latest in that Indiana coaching search, because there's been some names thrown around, some coaches asked directly about that vacancy. We'll go through what some of those candidates, you might call them, have said to this point, and who's kind of on the radar there for the Hoosiers. Then in the second segment, when we come back, we will talk about some of the results of the last couple of days. Alabama takes a loss against Missouri. How does that impact them in their quest for a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament? Who does it benefit if they drop down to a 2 seed this week? And then on the other side of that, what does it do for Missouri? Because Missouri is a team that is surging in all the computer numbers. They keep racking up wins. How high can they really go as they continue to put together results? Another team that is flying up the board here with what they have been able to do recently is Wisconsin. We'll talk about them as well there in that second segment. As always, we will finish today's show by giving you the games of the week. That's the games that you need to watch as you try to stay in tune with college basketball over the next 7 days before we speak again here on 3 True Values. But with all that said, let's go ahead. Let's get into it. Let's talk Matt McMahon at LSU. Gets a vote of confidence from the athletic director. They will bring him back for the 2026 season. And I think it's a pretty good decision. Did not really feel like he was a hot seat candidate per se, but there's definitely pressure on him. He was included in my most recent pressure index, which actually came out the morning that LSU went ahead and made this statement, this vote of confidence, letting everyone know where they stand. And there's pressure on Matt McMahon because despite doing a pretty good job of rebuilding a roster, which he did while facing some challenges, LSU was under investigation when he took the job. This was not the easiest opportunity for someone to come in and have immediate success after what happened at the end of the Will Wade era. You then add in that the SEC is as strong as ever. There are nights where LSU goes out there and they have got a really, really good team. We saw all the way through non-conference play how good that team was. They racked up wins in the non-conference schedule. The problem is they then made it into conference play and they just aren't quite good enough. They're relying a little bit too much on freshmen. It feels like they do have some good freshmen who, if they stay in the program, could develop into something really special there. But this year's roster, it just feels a step behind the other rosters that they're competing with in the SEC. So what does that say? Because I think McMahon has done well to recruit. I think generally the players that he's added have been good fits at LSU. Well, we confirm what we already knew. That is, LSU just has not invested the NIL resources that other SEC schools have into building the roster of their basketball program. So that is going to be a key next season, because with the vote of confidence, it was not just a promise to bring back Matt McMahon. It was a promise to invest more into the roster next year so that he can give a real shot at showing what he can do as a head coach. That's important here because it's not the first time we've seen it. And it's a changing landscape, I think, in the world of college athletics. We saw it with Mike Woodson last year. It did not work out. He has announced that he will be stepping down. We'll talk about the candidates for that job here in just a little bit. But Matt McMahon is a coach who I think has a much better chance at capitalizing on this new math equation that is happening in college basketball. You see, before, what would happen is a coach who was not having the results that a school wanted would probably be fired. They would pay his buyout. Then they would pay the buyout of a top coaching candidate somewhere, either a mid-major coach, a high-major coach, a top assistant, whatever the case was. They would go get somebody. Usually that comes with a fee that you're going to have to pay, especially if you want an elite level coach. So you're going to pay 2 buyouts. Then you're going to have to invest NIL into the roster regardless, because you're going to have so many players who leave just because their coach has now gone. They're going to hit the portal. They are going to see what they can do. So you have to invest the NIL resources because you have to build a roster. Beyond that, your head coach, in part of his negotiations to take the job now, is going to want to know how much he's going to have in NIL funds. That's one of the biggest sticking points now when these coaches are looking at different jobs. So you're going to have to invest 2 buyouts. The new salary of the head coach, let's not forget about that, because it will be at least what you were paying the last coach, potentially more because you're wanting better results. So you're signaling to this coach that you think he is a better head coach than the one you just got rid of. So you're going to have to pay a salary, 2 buyouts, and invest in NIL funds. So rather than do that, you bring back your head coach. All right. So you pay his salary, which again, probably less, if not equal to what you were going to pay the new head coach. You then take that money that you would have spent on one of the buyouts and you invest it into NIL. Now that's a few $1 million because each year that you have this coach in place, that buyout is going to drop. Now it drops because of the salary you're paying him, but again, you're going to pay a coach a salary regardless. So you take that difference in money, you invest it in NIL. Suddenly you go from the bottom of the SEC to at least middle of the pack. Now, if you then additionally add that difference in NIL that the new coach was probably going to negotiate to make sure that he had in place, was going to need to rebuild a roster, suddenly you're near the top of the conference. And then you go spend that money and you bring in a roster that if Matt McMahon or whatever coach you are looking at, if they are a good high-level basketball coach, a good college basketball coach who you can invest and trust your program with, they will have success. Look at this Indiana roster this year. It's the perfect example. Did they nail all of the additions? Did they all fit perfectly into the culture? No. But look at the talent on that roster. Look at what that roster should be. Look at what it was in preseason rankings. That's the level of roster that you should be able to bring in when we talk about these situations where a coach is getting this vote of confidence plus NIL funds. So look for LSU to be more aggressive in the transfer portal this year. Look for them to land a couple more big fish than what we're used to. If they can then tack that on with retaining some of the talent that they have with eligibility left, I think this LSU team can really take a step forward because I do believe in Matt McMahon and his ability to coach. See, Mike Woodson was a different situation in that I don't think a lot of people had the faith that he was going to be that level of coach. There was a hesitance there that existed. But if you believe that Matt McMahon can coach, there's no reason to believe with a roster similar to the level of what Indiana brought in this year that he could have a lot of success moving forward. So that's kind of the math equation that you now have to figure out in college basketball in particular, but across college athletics as well. It's not just about replacing the coach. You know that comes with replacing the roster. So what is cheaper? An elite roster or an elite coach? And if you feel like your coach could even possibly be closer to where he needs to be with that roster, you're much better off spending that money on players. So that is where we stand at LSU. That's where we stand in college basketball. We're going to see it happen more and more. I think that North Carolina is a team that maybe won't outwardly say it, but I would suspect that they're going to be in a similar position where they're going to take a long, hard look at how North Carolina built their roster last year, because they were in the mix. They were looking at several different prospects who I think would have improved what this team can be, at least the floor of it. They did not end up landing any of those players, and it has come back to bite them in a major way. So look for Hubert Davis to get some more NIL backing. Matt McMahon, we just talked about. There will be other coaches throughout the country who get this kind of boost, this vote of confidence, as they like to call it. Now, we talk about Indiana, and it's important because now they tried this method. It did not work. Mike Woodson was just not able to take this roster and make it into something special. So now you fire Mike Woodson. You go out and you search for a new head coach. As we said, it comes with all kinds of things that are going to happen. But Indiana is still a historic program, a program with a lot that goes with it positively. The negative would be it hasn't really been what it should be in over a decade now. So, how tough is it going to be to return into that glory? With NIL, I think they just showed you how much they're willing to invest. I think it's going to attract a lot of coaches who may not otherwise have been interested. We look at the names that have been thrown out there. Look, Brad Stevens, we get this one off the top because it's eliminated. Like, Brad Stevens has said he will not take the job. I don't think anyone actually thought he was going to take the job. His name comes up, understandably, every time that Indiana comes open, though. And it will probably through the end of time. But Brad Stevens has no reason to leave the Boston Celtics, especially right now. There might come a day where he signals that he wants to come back. But let's be clear, he will signal that he wants to come back. It will not be that the Indiana job opens and suddenly he's in the mix as a candidate. So that one has been shot down. He is not coming to be the Indiana head coach. Two coaches traveled to Indiana to play against the Hoosiers in Big Ten play, and both were asked about the job and their names being tied to it. The first one was Dusty May, of course, who everyone wanted them to move on from Mike Woodson to hire last year. What probably would have been the best decision, especially with hindsight. Because Dusty May has those connections to Indiana. He's beloved there, gets a standing ovation even as the opposing coach when he heads there. It just doesn't seem like it's a real possibility, though. Why would he leave? He signed up for Michigan for a variety of reasons, but he turned down some jobs that were probably a little bit bigger in terms of basketball brand than Michigan. He likes the fit there. Clearly, something about that job interests him. He has been given everything he needs to succeed at Michigan. He feels like he has been set up. He has gotten a lot of the players that he wanted to get in so far. He's in the process of building a culture. 1 year at Michigan. There's already talks about contract extensions for him, upping that buyout, I would assume, is the main goal there. So if we can, for the most part, rule him out, I mean, there's always an outside possibility. You then look at a guy like Mick Cronin, who is from more of that Midwest background, coached at Cincinnati, had great success there. It's been turbulent at UCLA, to say the least, this year, but even throughout his tenure, the cultural fit has been a little bit iffy. And like, I say that, and I think that some people think that I'm either saying that he's not fit to be the coach there, or that he he's should be fired or something. That's not the case. Mick Cronin is an incredible basketball coach who is leading UCLA to success more often than not. Some really good success along the way. He has built some good rosters. And he is a guy who is not ever going to be fully happy no matter what team he's coaching because he expects such a high level of buy-in that he's going to have to drag other people up to that level more often than not. So the fit that I'm talking about is simply the difference between the Midwest blue collar mentality and the West Coast kind of mentality. That's what I'm talking about there. And there's no reason that he can't bring his mentality and implement it, as we've seen even over a short period of time here, be able to do in a lot of ways, bringing this UCLA team much closer to what he wants them to be. Now they slipped up against Minnesota, but still they have been a much better team in recent weeks. So that's one that is definitely floating out there. He has to answer the questions when they play against Indiana. And then the last coach who gets a mention somewhat out of nowhere was Mark Turgeon. That name has kind of swirled around and been talked about. The former Maryland coach, now in semi-retirement, I suppose, would be a very interesting fit, a return to college coaching. He had some really good teams at Maryland. He coached with a lot of success. Now, the question that I would have is, A, he got out before a lot of this NIL stuff hit full force. He has not seen the transfer portal the way that it is. Is he prepared to take a job and learn a lot of that stuff? Second would be that Maryland wasn't at the peak, the pinnacle of where Indiana is looking to go when he ended up departing from that program. So where does that leave them in terms of the perception of the hire? Because I think Mark Turgeon is a great coach. I think it'd be an interesting hire. I think it'd be another really good basketball coach introduced into the Big Ten, and that can only do good things for your conference. Just look at the strength of the SEC now as they continue to just add good coaches at every opening. So it's an interesting coaching search to follow. There will be plenty more names that get brought up, that get involved over the course of this. We're nowhere near done. We've still got about a month before we can even think about them making a hire. So I'm sure there will be twists and turns along the way. We'll find out more about who is interested, who is not interested. It's going to be, for now, the biggest opening that we have. There's always the opportunity for another one to open up, but right now, this is the job that really looking at and drawing a lot of intrigue. So when we come back on the other side, we will talk about some of the results of this week. We'll talk about Alabama, Missouri, and Wisconsin and how they have been impacted in NCAA tournament picture. Welcome back into Three True Values as we keep things rolling here today on the show. We are now talking about some of the results of the past week. I want to talk about the Alabama loss to Missouri last night. That would have been Wednesday if you're not listening as this comes out on Thursday. But Alabama and Missouri played one of the most interesting games. Missouri jumped out to a big lead. And from there, it felt like Alabama had what it took to come back. And they would show it, and then Missouri would squash it. And then Alabama would make this little run, and you'd think, okay, well, I think they might have it. And Missouri would squash it. And that happened over and over, all the way to the final seconds. So it was a really fascinating game that ends up looking pretty bad for Alabama. They just could not get it going. They could not break through. They could not get the stops. That was the biggest concern. It felt like every time Alabama would start to go on a run, they would start to get hot offensively. Missouri would just drive straight through the lane. Open dunk, open layup, open three-pointer, whatever the case was. Alabama turned the ball over far too much. There were a lot of issues. Offense was not one of them for the Crimson Tide in that game. Very impressive from Missouri to create that disruption and to be so efficient on offense. That's something that we usually think about when we think about Alabama. Missouri was incredibly efficient. They were getting to the rim and they were getting open looks from three, and they were knocking them down, and they continued to knock them down. This Missouri team showed something here in a big way. But we start with Alabama, who, when you run the numbers this morning, looking at bracketology, they still have a very good case to be a one seed. The last one seed, the fourth one, but they still have a very good case for it. And their resume matches up just about evenly with Tennessee's. But I'm giving the edge to Tennessee just for now because I can't get the eye test to even out. I can look at the numbers. I can look at the resume. But it doesn't feel right that Alabama, who has a similar resume to this other team, two other teams, really, you could throw Houston in that conversation if you really want to, but you've got Alabama going up against these two other teams, and their result just looked bad. It looked like they were not in that one seed conversation. The way that they were loose with the basketball, the way that they could not stop straight line drives, it was concerning. And so when that happens, I'm inclined to drop them. And look, if they come out and they have a big performance over the weekend, if Tennessee loses to A&M, which is very much in play, that is a big time matchup that we're going to see in the SEC. If either of those, happen, Alabama's right there. They're going to jump back in, and we'll see how they line up from then forward. But right now, I've got to drop them. After that result, they have to fall down when they have a comparable resume to the other teams that are around them. Tennessee, of course, the benefactor there, they move up. They have not been incredible, but they've been really good, and they've gotten results, the same number of results as Alabama. I mean, I say this, the resume is right there, very similar. Houston is, I think, the really interesting one there, because I'm inclined to move Houston above both of them at this point. But the selection committee just less than a week ago told us that was not the case right now. So trying to figure out what can change for Houston to make that difference. That's what's going to be the key here, trying to identify when it is that Houston has done enough that the selection committee would jump them over that duo. Then we look at it from the Missouri side, and Missouri has been a red-hot team of late. They have picked up really good results. They've picked up some impressive resume-building wins. They have just worked and worked and worked, and they have climbed slowly through bracketology. They keep moving up, and they are now, I think, in the 3-seed conversation. A team that wasn't even a 4-seed just a couple weeks ago. Just a week ago, really. But they keep putting together not just results, but convincing results against top teams. So for Missouri, it's a jump and then it's a leap. And now here they are. They're in the 3-seed conversation. Their computer numbers back it up. The resume backs it up. The eye test last night certainly backed it up. This is one of the best teams right now. And so they should be treated as such. I've got them moving up the board pretty quickly here in bracketology. We'll see how far they can go. I'm not sure what the cap is, because I don't think they're as good as that group of SEC teams that's up at the top, those 1-seed, those 2-seed teams that we just talked about. But then again, if they beat those teams head to head, you start to rethink that argument. So this is where Missouri stands. They are on the rise and looking really good. Another team that is really kind of soaring through things is Wisconsin. Another team that worked and slowly moved their way up the board. They eventually get into that 4 seed conversation, up to 3, and now all the way to a 2 seed because they are playing incredible basketball right now. I think they might be the best team in the Big Ten. I think that the way that they're playing right now, I would not want to match up with them regardless of what conference I play in, regardless of what seed or where I stand. Because this team is playing, it's not your old school Wisconsin basketball. They are playing fast, they are moving the basketball. John Tonji has been incredible. They've, of course, got just that incredible depth that they always bring to the table. And right now, they cannot be slowed down. They roll through Purdue the other day, and I thought that was a very impressive win for the Badgers because Purdue is a team that is going to make you play how they play. That's how they find success. You know, we wondered, would Purdue be able to continue to be so good without Zach Edey? Well, the thing that they've done so well that's kept them up in this conversation is just play their basketball and make you play their basketball. Wisconsin was able to break through that and was able to win and kind of dictate things in a way that not many teams are able to do against Purdue. So that was impressive. And I think that there's just this air about this team. The computer numbers were early to them. The computer numbers started to rise, and you started to think, is this team that good? And then they showed it with the eye test. That paper resume is catching up, and they are firmly in the mix for a 2 seed here. And if they ran the table, look, these other teams are going to have to take losses along the way. There's enough SEC teams up there. There are going to be losses. If Wisconsin could run the table, there is no telling. They might just have enough to get all the way up into the 1 seed conversation by the time it's all said and done. That's to be determined, though. We'll see as they keep rolling through Big Ten play. When we come back on the other side, we'll get you with the games of the week. That's the 7 days before we speak again. We'll tell you the game you should watch each day of the week. Get you out of here right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in and to the final segment this week on 3 True Values. Let's roll through the games of the week, everything you need to watch to keep up with where we stand. We're going to start in the AEC. That's right, the American East. On Thursday night, we have got Bryant and Vermont. It's not a marquee matchup by any means, but it could have huge implications in that regular season conference title race. And as we know, in these mid-major to low-major conferences, it is important to win that regular season title because it generally gives you a big advantage heading into your conference tournament, which is ultimately what matters. So it doesn't guarantee you a spot in the NCAA tournament. This game will not have that kind of implication, but it will be a good testing ground for what we will see in the conference tournament. It will also help determine the seeding of that conference tournament. On Friday, we've got an in-state rivalry game. We've got Michigan and Michigan State, 2 teams battling to be on that 4 seed line right now. Michigan currently leads the Big Ten. They are atop the conference standings. Michigan State right there knocking on the door to be a top 16 overall seed. Michigan in the mix right now. We'll see if things went the Spartans' way. Could things flip there and change it up? Then on Saturday, we've got, I mentioned it already in the show, Texas A&M playing Tennessee. That's going to be a huge matchup because Tennessee just edged onto that 1 line. If they lose that game, they could certainly lose that spot to either Alabama or Houston, depending on other results. But if they win that game, they pretty much lock up that they're going to be that last 1 seed for another few days at least. Then on Texas A&M side, they got the nod. They were highly highly favored by the selection committee when they released their top 16 seeds. They took a loss since then to Mississippi State. They now have to rebound. Otherwise, they could fall back onto that 3 seed conversation. They could dip right out of the 2 seed within a week. But a win raises them right back up to where the selection committee had them, probably that sixth overall spot as they look to rise even further. Then on Sunday, we've got St. John's against UConn. St. John's leading the Big East right now. They look like a potential top 16 seed as well, but they play UConn, who has struggled badly, has not shown any consistency. But in the second half against Villanova, looked like they're supposed to look. It was the team that we expect to see. I think the more they lean on Liam McNeely, the better things can get. This is a big chance for UConn to kind of get off of that bubble conversation, to assert that, hey, look, we have had our ups and downs. We have struggled to figure out the pecking order here, to figure out the rotation here, to figure out all kinds of things. But they're still in the mix. They're still the back-to-back champions. This is a chance to assert that in a big way. On Monday, we've got Houston and Texas Tech. This will be a big one. I said Houston, I think, has a big case to be a 1 seed in this NCAA tournament. This is going to be a big opportunity to show why, because they've got Texas Tech, another big-time top 16 overall team. So you're going to get the kind of marquee showdown in the Big 12 that you want there on Monday. And then on Tuesday, we've got Wisconsin against Illinois. This Wisconsin team, I've just talked about how great they have been, how fun they have been to watch. And so here's an opportunity to do that. They will be playing against a team in Illinois who has plenty to offer. And as I look at this, I'm now realizing that schedule was incorrect. Somehow that got into the wrong date here. So we're going to replace that with Wisconsin against Washington, which is on the correct day there on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, we're going to wrap things up here with, and we hate to do 2 games for one team in the same week, but we've got Michigan State taking on Maryland. Maryland, a team that the computer numbers also like out of the Big Ten. So we'll finish up the week watching that one. Could have more top 16 implications. At the very least, it has 5 seed implications because those teams both on that line. We'll see you this time next week right here on 3 True Values. Thanks for tuning in. I'm James Fletcher.